it occurred to me while I was thinking about this story, and I'm talking about the night that I partied with the Diaz brothers in Orlando, Florida, a couple of years ago. And as I was thinking about this story, and I brought it up several times on the show, but there's just never been a good time to tell it. And I realize why now. A Diaz brother has not won a fight in the entire history of MMA on the rocks. So Nick Diaz's last win was in 2011, and Nate Diaz last won a fight against Conor McGregor March 5th of 2016, and MMA on the rocks would not be formed until a couple of months later in July of 2016. So I never really felt like it was an appropriate time to tell this story, because it's a story that really celebrates who the Diaz brothers are as people. And I wouldn't want to bring that up like after a loss. And then they kept stringing us along for when they were going to fight. And then Nate finally got in there, UFC 241, put on an awesome fight after 3 years away, and is able to get a victory over a guy like Anthony Pettis. It's really an amazing accomplishment. So, of course, I figured it's the perfect time to tell this story finally. And it's one of those stories that a series of events just kind of culminated and resulted in everything just being perfect. And it's one of those nights that really sticks out in my memory. And I remember it so vividly, Jeff. That's why I really wanted to wait for the opportune time to tell this story, because I know whenever the opportunity came up, I'd be able to do it in pretty great detail, even though there's not like video or anything documenting. I took a couple of pictures that night. So let me start from the beginning. So it was UFC on Fox 17. It was in Orlando, Florida. It was December 19th, 2015. So MMA on the Rocks wouldn't exist for another 6 or 7 months after this event. I was still living in New Jersey at the time. So I actually flew down to Orlando for this. I used to go to a lot more live events back in the day when I was young and childless. And got an Airbnb in Orlando. The main event was Rafael dos Anjos and Donald Cerrone for the lightweight championship. And Nate Diaz was on the card as well. He was fighting Michael Johnson. So I was excited. I get there early. I watch every single fight. This was actually the night Kamaru Usman beat Leon Edwards, to give you an idea of how long ago this was as well. Valentina Shevchenko was on the card. She was not nearly as well known. Nate Marquardt was on the card against CB Dalloway. It was a great card. Karolina Kowalkiewicz and Randa Marcos. And then Alistair Overeem and Junior Dos Santos was the co-main event. And right before that was Nate Diaz and Michael Johnson. So Nate Diaz boxes up Michael Johnson. Michael Johnson is fast and powerful, but Diaz was able to piece him up and come away with the unanimous decision victory. And that's when he gave his famous speech calling out Conor McGregor. And the rest is kind of history when it comes to that. I don't want to talk too much about Conor McGregor and waste time on all that nonsense. But, that's kind of really what springboarded Nate's career, was that call out of Conor McGregor. Motherfucker, you took everything I work for. You know who's the real money fight is me. I'm paraphrasing, of course. So during the fights, the wife and I decided to walk around the arena. So this is the Amway Center in Orlando, Florida. So we're walking around, and they have a rooftop bar, and it's called the 180 Skyway, I believe. 180 Skylight, something cheesy like that. So you take an elevator up to this bar, and it's a rooftop, and it overlooks Orlando, and the arena is like a big sphere, so it kind of sits on a deck like underneath the sphere and overlooks the city. It's really nice, really kind of like swanky nightclub kind of thing. So I go up there, I have a drink, and I just happen to strike up a conversation with this janitor who the rooftop bar was empty at this time. It was like the prelims were on, and not a lot of people were even in the arena yet. So I get to talking to this janitor, super nice guy. and he was actually into the fights a little bit, and he was, going to try and watch on the monitors and stuff. So we were talking about the fights, and me, Jeff, I love to talk to anybody who likes to talk about mixed martial arts. So, we chat about it a little bit, and then he kind of goes on his way, and then I was going to leave, and he calls me over. He's like, "Hey, buddy, later there's an after party in this bar, and it's going to be hosted by Nick Diaz." And he showed me there was like a little flyer. I was like, okay, cool. Maybe I'll check that out. It's not really my thing. I'm not like a nightclub guy. And looking around this nightclub, I could kind of see what the scene was going to be like later on. It's like glass tables and white couches, and outside they have like fancy umbrellas, and everything is like nice glass. It was pricey in there. The drinks were expensive. So I was like, all right, maybe I'll do it. And he said, listen, the way they do it is they like a real nightclub vibe. So even though you're already in the arena, they make you line up to get on the elevator to come up here. So they can only get a couple of people coming up at a time. And it kind of helps, slow down the bar, so the bartenders can serve more drinks to people as they come in. People buy their drinks and then they move to the outdoor patio, etc. I guess it helps pace things out. He says, take this staircase right here. It's not locked. It's not marked or anything. Just go down the staircase right now so you can see how to get back up later. I was like, hey, man, thanks for the tip. I appreciate it. So, the fights end, and Cowboy got knocked out in the main event. I was kind of bummed about that. It was his second shot at the title, so he probably wasn't going to see another one for a while. And that turned out to be correct. And we decided, hey, let's go check out that after party. Maybe we'll catch a glimpse of Nick Diaz. So we go back to the staircase, the unmarked staircase he told us to go to. And we see everybody lining up at the elevator. They have these velvet ropes and everything over there. And, they're checking IDs and the whole thing. And, this is like all the people who are dressed a little bit nicer at the fights and stuff. And I was like, oh, man, this is not going to be my scene. So we go up the staircase. I go over to the bar and I get a beer. And then there's like a little roped off VIP section right by the elevator, and I got a seat right next to that VIP section. And then out of nowhere, Nick Diaz just comes in and he sits down on this like velvet couch that's pretty close to the bar, and he just sits there with his head down, like looking on his phone. And people are starting to come in up the elevator, and they're walking by him. They're trying to get his attention, and he's ignoring everybody, just head down on the phone. And you would think like he's hosting the after party, he would like, get in the DJ booth or something. But no, he's just kind of sitting behind this VIP section. And those of you who know anything about Nick Diaz, he's a very private guy. He's very quiet. This is definitely not his scene either, not any more than it is my scene. So he's sitting there on the couch on his phone, and I took a picture of him on my phone, and then I was trying to take a picture of myself with him kind of in the background, and I get tapped on the shoulder by this guy, this really big guy, and he says, "Hey, buddy," and I was like, "Oh, sorry, no pictures or whatever." And he says, "You want a picture with Nick?" I was like, "Yeah, that'd be cool." I mean, it doesn't look like he's up for it. So he turns around and he says, "Hey, Nick, get over here. You got to take a picture with this guy." So he opens up the rope and he's like, "Come on over here." So I'm standing there with my beer with Nick Diaz, and I didn't know what to say, man. I've been watching Nick Diaz fight for I don't know how many years at this point. The Goga Plata submission over Takanori Gomi, the knockout of Robbie Lawler. Like, I don't know what to say. I'm at a loss for words. I'm not the type to get starstruck, but I couldn't put a sentence together. This fucking Nick Diaz standing in front of me. So I'm just like, hey, man. And that was it. And then the guy took a picture for me, and I was like, hey, thanks so much. I'm a big fan. I really appreciate it. We're going to stay and hang out at the bar for your after party or whatever. And so I go I go back out of the velvet rope section, and I'm sitting there on cloud nine. You know, I got a picture with Nick Diaz. This is like the coolest thing. I'm trying to post it on Instagram and Facebook and whatever else. And I didn't have the podcast at the time, so it was just like my personal Instagram that nobody ever looked at, and even the people who did are mostly like family and friends that don't watch UFC. It wouldn't mean anything to them, but you know, it was fucking awesome for me because I got a picture with Nick Diaz. So I'm there and I'm, you know, posting it and you know, I'm thinking about the fights, and the place starts to fill up, right? And we start getting pushed like down the bar a little bit to the point where we can't really order drinks anymore because it's starting to get crowded, but we get pushed like a little closer. And the guy who brought me over before, he was like, "Hey man," I looked, I was like, "Hey," like, "by the way, my name's Jeff." He's like, I'm Nick and Nate's cousin. And he's like, "You want to come over here and have a drink with us?" And I was like, yeah. So he opens the rope. He lets my wife and I back into the VIP section, which has a couple more people in it at this point. Nate isn't there yet. I guess he's still like downstairs, like changing from his fight with Michael Johnson and everything like that. Nick is kind of sitting there on his phone still. He had a girl with him. I assumed it was his girlfriend. And, you know, a few more people start to file in. And one of them was Jake Shields. And they start to bring bottles in and start putting them out. And I was like, I was talking to the guy, you know, Nick's cousin, for a little bit. And I was like, "Man, I appreciate this so much. I feel a little out of place here." He's like, "Hey, relax, man. Here, have a drink." And he like pours shots, and we take some shots. I'm like, "All right, cool." And then I turn around and to cheers for the shot. And who's holding a shot glass but Jake Shields behind me? So here I am taking shots with Jake Shields. I'm like, all right, this is cool. So I'm face to face with Jake Shields. I start to be a little speechless, but you know, the booze are catching up. So I was like, let me strike up a conversation. How many times do you have the opportunity to be having a drink with Jake Shields? So I start talking to him, and it happened to be not long after he had the fight with Husamar Palhares, and Palhares held a Kimura too long on him, and he was tapping, and Palhares wouldn't let it go. Of course, he's famous for that. And then when he finally did let it go, Jake hit him after the bell, and understandably so, because Palhares was trying to rip his arm off even after the fight was over. So I brought that up. I was like, "Man, what a fucking dick, huh?" And he's like, "Yeah, right." so there we are. And then you know, another round of shots, and then next thing I turn around and there's Nate Diaz standing right behind me. And he's got the biggest smile on his face. His face is covered in bruises because it was a pretty much a brawl with Michael Johnson. But he's got the biggest grin on his face. You know, he just won the fight. He just called out Conor McGregor in one of the most epic post-fight speeches of all time. And, you know, he's coming up to the after party that his brother is hosting, quote unquote. And he's ready to let loose. So I can tell you this much. They like Patron. And Jake Shields is a Jameson guy. So, you know, Jake Shields was kind of like had the bottle of Jameson to himself, and everybody else was taking shots of Patron, and they kept getting passed my way. And I'm not one to turn down a shot, especially when it's with the Diaz brothers. I got a picture with Nate that night, and I don't know what happened with my phone or the iCloud storage or whatever, or my phone memory, but the picture didn't save. And man, I'm so bummed about that. But the memory was never erased. Like I don't know how many shots of Patron with Nate. And, you know, I got to see him letting loose and see he's like a really cool guy, because when you see him in the media, he's all, you know, fuck you and fuck this and motherfucker this and motherfucker that. And fucking money fight and fuck Conor McGregor and fuck you and fuck everybody and fuck your mother and fuck your grandchildren. But you know, in person, he's not that. I mean, you could tell he's a fucking hard ass motherfucker. But you know, he just wanted to have a good time. So I guess the moral of the story, Jeff, is just be cool to people, and then cool shit happens. I struck up a conversation with a janitor who happened to share some interests with me, and he shared some information with me that led to me, having drinks with the Diaz brothers, and it was a once in a lifetime experience. And I can't even tell you how I got back to my hotel room that night. I was so appreciative of the guy who brought me into that VIP section. I'm not a guy who kind of goes to these types of bars, and I think that stood out to him, that I felt out of place, but I just really wanted to be there because the Diaz brothers were there, and I think that's why he kind of singled me out to bring me in, because we were like the little group of outcasts amongst all the people who were dressed swanky, and they're ordering cosmopolitans and stuff, and we're drinking Budweiser and doing shots of Patron. And it was such like the opposite way that society is supposed to be. Those people are supposed to be in the VIP section, and the people like myself and Jake Shields and the Diaz brothers, like these grizzled MMA fighters, they should be like at the back of the bar, struggling to get a drink. But for that one night in Orlando, Florida, Jeff, that's not the way it was. And it was really one of the coolest experiences ever. And it made me a fan for life of those guys. No matter what would happen thereafter. And even though neither one of them had won a fight until now, since the creation of this podcast, and I've been waiting over 3 years to tell this story, I'll always be a fan of those guys, just because I had that experience, and it was really awesome.